my name is Laura Connick. I am with Robinson Sotheby's International Realty, and I have with me today Justin Allen with Union Home Mortgage. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. So, Justin and I met about a year ago. I don't exactly remember where we met, probably on Facebook. But then we went out and had coffee together. And Justin spent a lot of time explaining the lending process. And what I appreciated most about him was not only his knowledge, but also the way he was so good at explaining things very simply. So to me, that was exactly what I was looking for any of my clients, but especially first-time home buyers. And we just closed on Friday with a first-time home buyer, Joe, and I want to thank you so much. The process was so seamless. Joe he was very comfortable in all of his lending decisions, and that I credit 100% to you. So thank you.
I appreciate that. I'm excited to be here and been a great work with you as well. So it's going to drive me nuts now because I don't recall where we met, but I think it may have been maybe on the listing side you had a year or two ago, but now it's going to drive me nuts. So thanks
Yeah,
for
yeah.
that.
After a while, there's so many different ways to meet people that after a while I find myself like, well, how did we meet again? And I just saw somebody the other day and they were so out of context that I knew them, but I didn't know where. So
It all blurs together.
it
So
really does. Yes, yes. So I have some questions for you, and all about lending, and really want to get have our viewers a chance to really get to know you. So my first question, just to kick things off, share a little bit about yourself and how you got into the mortgage industry.
yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I kind of fell into it to be honest with you. I wasn't I went to UC, didn't graduate UC thinking I'm going to be on or I'm going to be actually next month will be 9 years into the mortgage industry, believe it or not. It's flown by, but definitely didn't think I'd end up in the mortgage industry lifetimes ago, but here I am almost a decade later. So what actually kind of spurred it is I worked at Fidelity Investments here locally, and I actually was renting at the time, decided to buy my own condo, and I bought my first condo with my the young fiance, now my wife. Now we have two kids together, so that's kind of evolved over time as well, which has been pretty cool. But when I bought my first condo, I really didn't know what the process entailed, didn't know what to expect, really didn't know what to do, but I found it very interesting and in the overall process itself. So closed on my condo, and then, ironically enough, a couple months later, ended up with my first position in the mortgage industry. The team I used at the time, I knew fairly decently from just past relationships, past friendships, and they said, "Hey, you should look into the mortgage in the mortgage industry," and I did, and here I am almost 10 years later.
Awesome. It's always interesting to see and hear how people get started. You come up with an idea for college or, your life plans, and then life has a way of changing your plans, and a lot of times it's for the better. And it's really kind of
Yep.
fun to see how it all progresses. So on that note, what drives you in this business today, and what keeps you passionate about helping buyers?
I think it really goes back to really the reason why I got into this space to begin with. I knew owning a home and home ownership in general can be so powerful. And again, as being a prospective client and being a home buyer for the first time almost a decade ago, didn't really know what to expect throughout the process, didn't know how powerful it could be, didn't know what great strategies to use. And I really saw a big gap between buyers like myself at the time that, had a degree in finance, had a pretty decent financial background, right? But knew nothing about buying a home, right? And that's the American dream that we all strive for is home ownership because it can do so much, it can do so much for us in terms of our net worth, building generational wealth and things of that nature. And that kind of propelled me to still where I am 10 years later, being able to help families make the right decision. And if you think about it, it's at the time the biggest investment that they're making. They're either buying their first home, and then they're going to buy their move up home because their family size has grown and then shift generations down the line. Maybe they're downsizing now because their kids have since left the house. So each progression down that path, whether it's an investment property or a first home, second home, whatever the case may be, at that time is arguably one of the biggest investments they're ever going to make until the next one happens, right? And being at the forefront of that, helping them make the right decision, putting the right strategy in place, really propels me to do what I am doing today, which I love doing.
Well, I can tell that you love what you do, and I appreciate all the information that you send to me, just kind of keeping me in the know. So it's very helpful.
There's never enough of it, I'll tell you that.
No, no. And so a lot of times I will use those kind of for my own social media. And I
Yeah.
always make sure I credit you, but it's super helpful.
You play a
And
big part of that too, right? So
yes,
that's why we make, a real estate advisor and a lender make a great team because, we're both of those roles are instrumental in terms of how they, trust us, make the right decisions and make that big purchase I just mentioned.
absolutely. I totally. So you and your team recently transitioned to Union Home Mortgage. Tell us about that. Why did you make the move?
Yeah, I mean, it's something, there's a couple different reasons why, and it's nothing with our previous platform. Everywhere we've been has been great. There are a lot of changes happening in the industry currently, and I think it's important for us to be able to help service the clients in the right way, serve our partners like yourself in the right way as well. Union Home, I think, gives us the best platform to be able to continue on that path. And just to kind of give you really two brief examples. One's kind of a hypothetical, but certain things are happening as we speak in this industry. We
Mm.
all know who Rocket Mortgage is, right? Not to single them out, but they're very good at what they do, right? They're very good with advertising. They just basically in the last 6 months made a $9 billion bet with a B, $9 billion where they bought up Redfin, right? Which a lot of prospective buyers use. And they also bought up or acquired Mr. Cooper, which they're one of the biggest loan servicers in the entire country. They service about every 1 in 6 loans in America. So what that means basically, if you have a mortgage or I have a mortgage, we make payments to someone different, or we make payments to a loan servicer, and Mr. Cooper services 1 out of every 6 loans that are done, right?
Okay.
So what Rocket's trying to do and what the industry is heading towards is a condensing in the way of being able to control everything beginning to end, right? Being able to help the client realize or help us understand that a client's going to buy a home even before they realize themselves
Mhm.
they want to be able to buy a home, right? And that's kind of where the right data source comes into play. And then also once they do buy that home, being able to truly have that relationship for the life of the loan itself by being able to service their loan. So Union Home services 100% of their loans, which is, I think, very, very nice to have, not
Yeah.
only for ourselves to help them in the best way possible, even far beyond the loan closing, for yourself being able to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Smith have listed their home because we'll have all that data, right? And we
Mhm.
can continue to work together as a team to help make sure that we're their realtor for life or their lender for life because we have the right data and we're servicing that relationship well beyond the loan closing, right? Um, so that was a big reason why is to have that loan servicing aspect of it, which a lot of lenders don't have. A lot of lenders will take the loans, sell them off to Mr. Coopers of the world, and they're gonna, take that relationship away from you potentially, right? Which we don't want to have that risk of doing, especially in today's day and age. The other really big aspect is, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the two government-sponsored enterprises
Mhm.
that help sponsor and guarantee these conventional loans. Fairly good chance, this is where the hypothetical I was mentioning earlier, fairly good chance that those two entities uh, are taken out of government conservatorship in the second half of the current presidential administration, depending upon obviously how that plays out. We don't know that, for certain, of course, but that's been a big agenda item of this current administration. If that happens, that's going to play well into the bigger lenders that are in the lending space currently. And Union Home's a top 40, top 35 lender that's going to be able to service clients in the right way. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac are going to give those bigger lenders more favoritism, right? Just because they're going to be able to send them more business, send them more volume,
Sure.
and being on that platform with Union Home, gives us the ability to do that. So that's my long-winded answer to really two main reasons why we wanted to stay ahead of the curve as it relates to some of those things that may be happening in the industry currently.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. That was really helpful. So speaking of the market and things that are happening in the market, what are you seeing in the Cincinnati real estate market right now?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways I want to be able to approach that from a lending perspective. I think myself included, a lot of us think that rates as of July, what's today? July 28th, 2025 would be a lot lower than where we expected them to be. Or let me restart. I think a lot of consumers, people like myself that are in this every day, thought that rates today would be a lot lower than where they actually are, right?
That's what the NAR has been telling us since 2024, and it has not happened.
Not happening. So that's okay. That's just part of where the industry is currently. Each, that gives us different advantages and disadvantages. I think for buyers that are serious about buying a home, obviously it takes away some of the competition that's
Mhm.
out there because a lot of buyers are waiting for rates to drop, and I think we'll touch on that later as well. Which I don't think is the right, move necessarily, just based off what's going to happen in the market.
Mhm.
But higher rates means less competition. So, along with that, we're seeing, as we always do with seasonal trends, we're seeing, more and more inventory growth happen from the spring to the summer. We're probably going to see that peak out in the next probably 30 days or so as we go back into school, into the fall and winter months. And we always see that seasonal trend, that roller coaster, so to
Sure.
speak, move up and down, right? So, more inventory than we've had previously. And, more inventory meaning, we're still at record lows, obviously, but we're off those record lows of what we saw in 2021, 2022, 2023, in the past 3 or 4 years, right? So more inventory than what we've seen in the past 5 years, less buyers because we thought that rates would be lower than where they are today.
Mhm.
Uh, it gives buyers potentially more affordability and, less competition to be able to actually buy a home where they probably couldn't have had that luxury 2, 3, 4 years ago.
So we keep hearing that it's still a competitive market, um, but also that buyers are pulling back. So which is it, and why would you say?
A little bit of both. So, I mean, if we're seeing homes right now that if they're priced right, and you know all about this too, if homes are priced right or even priced low per se,
Mhm.
we're still seeing a lot of competition. We see a lot of that in that first time home buyer price range, call it, what do you call it, 200,000 to even 350 in that ballpark roughly. So first time home buyers still make up a pretty sizable portion of the market, especially here locally and even nationwide as well.
Mhm.
So if homes are priced right in that range, obviously first time home buyers making up a majority of that range, those homes are still moving very, very quickly, especially if they're priced right, right? Um, I saw a couple homes over the weekend where buyers made offers and they were making offers on homes that, still had multiple offers, right? And those homes probably were underpriced to do exactly what it did to create a bidding war, which you still see that in your end, right?
Yes.
Um, so that trend is still there. It's just not as prevalent or as common as what it was 2, 3, 4 years ago, right?
Correct.
As you get into the higher, price point, call it 450 and above, higher than 600,000. That's just a different buyer demographic, and there's not as many buyers in that demographic that meet that price point. So those homes may sit a little bit longer because there's not as much demand as there is that needs to be there to take that inventory off the shelves, so to speak, right? Um, and I just mentioned this previously as well, as like I said, rates are higher than where we all thought they would be today. They've made some progress lower than what we saw from the last 18 months, albeit it's a slow pace. But I think a lot of home buyers are still waiting for that that price crash to happen, which I don't think will happen because there's still way too much supply for, way too much demand for little supply that's out there, right? And that imbalance won't happen or change overnight. So as long as that imbalance of too little supply for too much demand is out there, that's going to inflate home prices for time to come. And if that does happen, if rates do move lower, which I do think they will over the next 1 to 2 years, what's going to happen? All those buyers that are pulling back or have pulled back are going to get back in the market
Mhm.
and going to only fuel that fire further of home prices climbing higher and higher that than the pace they are currently, which will mean more multiple offers across all price points, in my opinion. So I think buyers that are buying right now that are serious about buying have the luxury of being able to get into homeownership now. And when rates do drop, we've beat this to a pulp, that they have the ability to take advantage of that by refinancing into that lower rate when that time does come.
Everything that you said there's a whole lot to unpack. One of the things that I have mentioned to buyers when they're kind of, well, the interest rate is really low or really high, or historically it's pretty much an average. But considering we are at 2 and 3%, this current rate feels kind of high. But I have talked to buyers, and maybe you can expand on this a little bit about paying that extra, just one mortgage payment a year and what that does to the time period of your loan.
You brought up two great points. I want to touch on the first thing you said first. So interest rates being high is always relative to something, right? It's always
Mhm.
relative to some time period. So here's a good example. So when rates were at their lowest, let's say 2.5% back in 2021, right? Everyone jumped, as fast as they could at them because those were historically low rates compared to where they were the past couple of years, or just even, you know, throughout the entire history of, home ownership, right?
Mhm.
And with that said, as rates started to slowly climb off that 2.5% level, they went from, let's say, 2.5% to 3.5%. Well, those buyers that were buying at the time when rates were 3.5%, what they say? Oh, rates are way too high, right? Because
Yes.
they're comparing that to when rates were 2.5%.
Right,
It
right.
went from 3.5% to 4.5%. Oh, 4.5% is way too high. Now,
Mhm.
I guarantee you, if you took all the buyers that are buying today, that are in the market to buy today, and I said, hey, you could buy a home with an interest rate of 3.5% or 4.5%, 100 out of 100 would raise their hands, right?
Mhm.
Because they're comparing it to where rates are today at 6.5 and 7.5%. So it's all relative to the timing. And I think that's a disadvantage we have that we're working against right now because that that change occurred so quickly within the matter of 12 months. Rates almost, doubled, if not close to tripled. And,
Yes.
buyers that were in the market at that time when rates were a lot lower, they're now, battling rates that are 2.5 to 3 times higher than where they were initially shopping to begin with, right? So it's all relative. And the opposite end of that is when rates were at 7.5% and close to 8% for a short period of time in 2023 and 2024. You know, buyers that were buying in the market at that point in time compared to where rates are today, they would love to have their rate be at 6.5% compared to 7.5% where
Right.
it was 18 months ago. Right. So it's all relative, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Um, so I just want to touch base on that because it's, I think that's, important context when people make their decisions. The second aspect of it, and remind me again, what was the second thing you touched on?
Paying an extra
Extra
mortgage
mortgage payment.
payment.
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways of doing it that make it really feasible and affordable for clients. So you've heard the terminology of, oh, can I make biweekly payments? Right. So if you think about making a biweekly mortgage payment, or if you get paid biweekly, you get paid 26 times a year, right?
Mhm.
Divide that by 12 months, that's 13, that's, essentially 13 mortgage payments. So
Mhm.
that one extra payment that you're making on the mortgage is all going towards principal throughout the entire year, right? And that makes a sizable difference. You may not notice it right away,
Mhm.
but that can, depending upon the rate and the loan size and things like that, that can easily shave off, 4 to 5 to 6 years off the mortgage itself, and that can lead to over, tens of thousands of dollars of saved interest over that entire time span.
So, and the reason why I encourage that is because trying to kind of encourage people out of the mindset of the rates are too high right now to do anything and I'm going to wait. Well, you can always refinance and you can always, if you can afford to, pay an extra mortgage payment and still wait for the rates to drop so that you can refinance. So there's a few ways around it, as you know, but it's mostly just trying to educate buyers because as we're talking, if the rates were to drop, to 4% tomorrow, there's going to be a frenzy, and there is just not the inventory out there for a multitude of reasons that we could spend an entire video
Yeah.
talking about. So,
Right back where we were 4 or 5 years ago, and that presents its own challenges, right?
yes, there's a whole lot of layers to this, and none of them that are a quick fix. So,
The last thing I'll say on that is I'm seeing a larger trend. You may see this as well, where people that did buy, 4 or 5 years ago when rates were 2.5%, they bought because the rates were low. They didn't necessarily love the house, right? And I've had personal conversations where I'm seeing a larger uptick of those clients coming back to me because we're, constantly staying in front of them, which is, is also important. back to my servicing talking point earlier, to where that house no longer works for them, or they never loved the house to begin with. Now they want to buy something new. So that only takes you so far in living in the house every day, right? Until buying for the rate no longer makes sense.
True, true. So speaking of buyers, what kind of buyers are active right now, and what's motivating them to make moves despite the fact that the interest rates are higher?
So I always say that life events will always trump interest rates no matter where interest rates are, right? So, I'll give you like a list of, past clients I've talked to or current clients I've talked to in the last, 3 to 4 days. One is unfortunately getting divorced. So, that is a lifestyle change that prompts maybe a change in home ownership, which, you never want to work with those situations, but that unfortunately does happen in society. The other one was a client that has their first home moving into a larger home because they have a baby on the way, right? Another one is they're getting married in 2 months. So all these are what? They're all life events. And no matter what life events occur, that's always going to have a larger emphasis on no matter where rates are, right?
Sure.
2.5% or they're at 10%, right? So I think the buyers that are active right now, or most active, are first-time home buyers that are renting. And keep in mind, rent's not going down either, right? So rent's increasing at a far superior pace than even what home prices are right now. So that doesn't help, home ownership in general, whether you're renting or buying, the cost of that's increasing, right? So we're having a lot of those conversations with first-time home buyers. And then those that are going through those life events, whether it's an unfortunate divorce or a passing of someone, or your family size is growing, all those things prompt, typically in most cases, a change in their homeownership goals or plans, right? So those are the bulk of the conversations we're having right now. And again, it's more so focusing on why they're buying, the goals of homeownership, and not necessarily focusing as much on the rate as you're focusing on making sure you're helping them have a clear mortgage plan moving forward as it relates to their overall financial plan. And that homeownership plays a big part of that.
Gotcha, gotcha. So speaking of life events, we just had one recently in our family. So we had purchased a property in Hilton Head
Mhm.
10, 12 years ago, and the prices were pretty reasonable. And then we
I'll be
sold
there
it.
next month, by the way. I can't wait.
What's that?
I'll be there next month, by the way. I can't wait.
Yeah. And so we ended up selling our place. The expenses have just gotten too high in a second home market. It's very difficult to increase the rental rate to accommodate the interests or the insurance and all of the fees, and it's a long story.
Yep.
So we were there 5 years, 5 days last year out of 365. So it wasn't fun anymore. So we actually ended up selling the property, made a nice little chunk of money on it because the coast always go up and then drop, and we always kind of just have our little hills. But we took that money and we bought a property in Oakley, and we're actually renting it out to our daughter and her fiance, and they're going to buy it from us when they're ready. It was an investment property, so we had to invest again. And I'm wondering because I'm kind of hearing a little bit about pent-up demand or pent-up money with some of the older generations. And are you seeing that where parents are starting to kind of fund their kids' home and then letting them buy them back?
I
Because
see a lot of that.
homeownership for
Yeah.
young families is just really difficult right now.
I see a lot of that. And I think it comes from a mixture of, I think the older generation, in my opinion, is probably better at saving than the younger generation is.
Mhm.
Whether it's just saving from, just their habits over time. Others have, and everyone has a mass amount of equity. You just alluded to it as well, and that have held their homes, or maybe it's an investment property, second home, whatever the case may be, you name it. Equities that are all-time high too, right? So we have some parents that are perhaps, tapping into some of their equity in the home that hasn't been tapped yet to help provide for a down payment for, their daughter that's buying their first home, for example, or maybe they're even taking enough equity to buy the house out in cash and then have have their children pay it back over their, whatever terms set for themselves, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, we do see a large number of parents being involved still, both from a financial standpoint and just from an opinion standpoint, right? Just because they do think they're, and rightfully so, they think they're, well educated because they bought multiple homes and have seen
Mhm.
different markets. They're
Yes,
good
yes.
favored. That plays a big part of it too.
So can you break down like the real cost of waiting for rates to go down or home prices to go down?
Yeah, so and I have tools that illustrate this where I'm really building out a customized mortgage plan for each individual we work with that's talking about or thinking about buying a home. And a lot of the conversations I have, especially if they bring those concerns to me, whether it's and they're two very common concerns, right? I'm going to wait to buy because home prices are high, or I'm going to wait for interest rates to drop, right? And those kind of mean two different things per se, but if you think about the, of course, my fire alarm's going off. Um,
I
we'll have to try to mute that out somehow. Um,
can't hear it.
no, you can't? Okay.
No.
No, that's pretty impressive, actually. Um, if you think about the higher home prices, the I simply break down this. There's way too much supply or way too much demand
Mhm.
for too little supply, right? And
Yes.
again, going back to a relevant time frame, buyers who want home prices to drop, they're thinking about what time period? Most likely 2008, 2009, even though they may not have been born then or weren't, viable buyers back then, right? Um, so if we simply talk about and show them data or show them graphs on, hey, home prices are climbing because inventory is at record lows, and we see the number of home buyers increasing as time moves forward. Even if you just look at demographics, the average age of a first-time home buyers climbed to 38 years old, right? It was 28 years old over a decade ago. It was 33-year-old. It was 33 years old 5 or 6 years ago. But if you look at the number of simply the number of 33-year-olds and the number of 38-year-olds that are going to be born over the next 5 to 10, 15 plus years, that number is climbing higher and higher and higher. So what that tells me, you're going to have more and more home buyers enter the market, and we're simply not having enough supply of homes to meet that demand. Really, the only answer for home prices is to build new homes. And again, going back to data always helps answer the questions that buyers have. But builders are not building homes fast enough to be able to keep up with that pace of buyers entering the market for the next 5, 10, 15 plus years, right? We're at about a million home deficit each year because of that, right? So um, that is kind of how I approach the path of higher home prices. I break it down in more detail, obviously. But as far as rates concerned, we kind of already touched on this earlier, you
Mhm.
know, and I kind of put it back on them too. And this is a very good question to think about when I'm talking to buyers. I simply, in a very, methodical way and very professional way, I said, hey, if Laura, you're a buyer, hey, Laura, I think the concern of interest rates is very, very valid.
Mhm.
However, do you think, and I asked them this question, do you think you're the only buyer that is waiting for interest rates to drop? And they kind of pause for a second and they come back and say, well, no, probably not, right? So I say, if you're not the only one waiting for interest rates to drop, if that does occur, and I think it will to a certain extent, we're not going to see 2 or 3 or even 4% anytime soon unless something catastrophic happens. But if rates do drop, which I think they will still, everyone that's waiting for that to happen will go back into the market. You're going to have now even more competition, which will fuel those home prices even higher. So they're kind of connected in a way. And that's how I break down the affordability aspect of it.
Got it. Okay. That's super helpful. So, how are you helping buyers win offers without overextending themselves?
I think it comes down to a couple different approaches. So we do a really good job of asking the right questions, right? And the biggest thing that we focus on is not just the mortgage itself, right? If you think about, individuals and their concerns, if you break it down to an extremely high level, you look at the amount of money they have coming in each month, whether it's from their income, whatever the case may be, and you look at the total amount of money going out each month.
Hmm.
So the mortgage is a big part of that, right? But also a big part of that is record high credit card payments that buyers now have, or consumers have, record high car payments that buyers now have, student loan debt.
Hmm.
Just debt overall has increased tremendously over the last 5, 10 years, right? So I always approach it from a high level of how much money does Mr. and Mrs. Smith have coming in each month? How much money do they have coming out each month, right? And this is extremely common conversation for buyers that are moving out of their first time home where their rate is 2 or 3 or 4% and moving to a larger home, larger price point, higher interest rate. So there's a pretty big disconnect typically between someone that has their current payment and moving to a payment that's almost double or triple, right? If you focus on strictly those two mortgage payments, it's
Hmm.
tough to move past that with a buyer because they're just focusing on that, right? But if we can focus on the amount of equity that they have, and we can focus on taking the equity to consolidate other debt that they have, whether it's a car payment that's on average over $1,000 a month now, or record credit card payments that's continuing to grow each month over month, or
Hmm.
student loans. If we can get rid of some of that monthly debt that is part of their overall outflow per month,
Sure.
even though their payment is 30, almost 2 or 3 times higher, that could be a big win because my job is to help minimize their difference in outflow per month. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
And then for buyers where they are waiting to save 20% to buy a home, maybe we talk about, hey, let's put a lesser amount down, but use some of that 20% you were going to have saved to limit all the other debt that you have if that's applicable, right?
Right.
So I always approach it from not just a mortgage standpoint, but an overall financial health and picture standpoint to make sure that they're in the best position possible to succeed financially when they do make that next home purchase or their first home purchase too.
I love all of that. It reminds me, I had only had my license for a short while and I had a young buyer. And, I knew how important it was for her to have a lender. And I don't even remember at this point who I connected her to. And she was pre-approved. And we start looking at houses and we get to this house and she really loves it. And then we talk to the lender and he tells her how much her payments would be a month and she froze
Yep.
because it was just a sticker shock for her. And it sort of made me realize that, and I've started telling my buyers this, especially my first time buyers, the question isn't how much are you pre-approved for? Tell your lender, this is how much I feel I can afford. How much house can I get with that? And then that's an entirely different conversation
Yep.
because, I mean, you don't think about that when you're renting. Okay, my rent's $1,800 a month. But then when you look at the, you can afford this much house. Well, you still have insurance and you still have that, there might be an HOA. There's just a whole list of issues and just like, my daughter just texted me and their gutter is leaking. I mean, there's just always something, so having these educated conversations I think is really important.
There's too many lenders out there that strictly just focus on payment and that's it, right?
Mhm.
We do a great job of breaking down and we have different resources. We visually show them. Use your example of paying 1,800 a month in rent. Multiply that over 5 years, that's $108,000 in rent, right? And that's a big number. And that kind of you know, hits people in the gut a little bit
Mhm.
because they think of things so short term. They don't think about the long-term impacts that can have, right? So those are things we do a great job breaking down. That's part of that overall financial planning picture.
So, Justin, we have just under 2 minutes. So, is what would you like your takeaway to be, to let people know about you?
I think for those that are thinking about buying a home, whether it's your second home, whatever the case may be, it all starts with having the right conversation, right? We're going to do a great job of breaking down everything about your overall financial picture and really understand what your goals are. Maybe it doesn't make sense to buy a home at this point, right? Depending upon your time frame in the house and things of that nature. So those are things that we're going to be able to help understand and customize for you. And really, once you do get to the point of buying a home, I think we break it down into a couple different phases. One, we have to do a great job, you and I both, of creating that excitement, right? Once we
Mhm.
create that excitement that aligns with their goals and their financial picture, we then have to do a great job of understanding, of turning that excitement into being able to showing the value of how homeownership can fit into their financial picture. And we're doing things like, you know, it all goes without saying, we can close quickly. We can talk about different strategies that exist. We do everything we need to make sure that we put our offers at the top of the list when listing agents review those offers, right? So we're going to call a listing agent, let them know that Laura's buyer is highly pre-approved and all the right steps ahead of time. And those are things that are going to help buyers win in this market because it is still competitive, just not as competitive as what it was a couple of years ago. So big takeaway, have a conversation. We're going to be able to take it from there and making sure that you have a clear, confident understanding moving forward with those next steps.
Awesome. I think we still have just a smidge of time.